Hey, welcome back to English in Advance. I'm your host, Jessica, and if you're watching this right now, I want you to know something. You are exactly where you need to be. Whether you just stumbled onto this channel by accident or you've been watching us for a while, today's episode is going to give you something real, something you can actually use. Not just in a classroom, not just on a test, but in your actual life, in meetings, in emails, in interviews, in conversations where the stakes actually matter. So stay with me because we are going to do some serious work today. And I promise it's going to feel less like studying and more like a real conversation between two people who both want to see you win. Now, before we dive in, I want to ask you something. Think about the last time you were in a professional situation and you knew what you wanted to say, but the words just weren't there. Maybe you were in a work meeting and someone asked your opinion and you froze. Or maybe you were writing an email to a client and you stared at the screen for 10 minutes because nothing sounded right. Or maybe you were in a job interview and the interviewer asked you something like, "Can you walk me through how you managed that project?" And you knew the answer. You lived the answer. But getting it out in English, in professional English, felt like climbing a mountain with no shoes. If any of that sounds familiar, that's exactly what today is about. We're going to fix that. Not all at once, because language doesn't work like that, but we're going to take a huge step forward together, right here, right now. So here's what we're doing today. This is a B2 level English listening practice session focused entirely on business English vocabulary. And let me just say quickly, B2 is a really exciting level to be at. It means you already have a solid foundation. You can understand the main ideas in complex texts. You can express yourself with some fluency and spontaneity, and you can interact with native speakers without things falling apart constantly. But B2 also has this interesting gap. You know enough to get by, but not quite enough to sound truly confident and natural in a professional setting. And that's the gap we're closing today. I'm going to walk you through real business vocabulary, the kind that shows up in actual meetings, real workplace conversations, authentic professional emails, and genuine business situations. We're not talking about textbook stuff that nobody actually says. We're talking about the phrases and words that real people use in real offices and real conference calls every single day. I'll give you context, examples, and practice opportunities so you don't just hear these words, you actually absorb them. All right, are you ready? Let's go. Let's start with something you'll hear in almost every professional environment, the word agenda. Now, you might already know this word. Most people at B2 level have heard it. But do you know how people actually use it at work? An agenda is a list of items or topics that are going to be discussed in a meeting. When someone says, "Let's stick to the agenda," they mean let's not get distracted or go off topic. Let's keep talking about the things we plan to talk about. And when someone says, "Can you send over the agenda before the call?" they're asking you to share that list of discussion points ahead of time so everyone can prepare. Now, here's how you might hear it in a real conversation. Imagine you're about to join a team meeting and your colleague, let's call her Priya, sends you a message that says, "Hey, do we have an agenda for today's meeting? I want to make sure I'm prepared." And you write back, "Yes, I'll send it over in a few minutes. We have 3 main items on the agenda. the Q3 budget review, updates on the new product launch, and a discussion about the upcoming team restructuring. See how natural that sounds? You're using the word in context, and you're showing that you know both the noun and the phrase, items on the agenda. One more thing about this word. In some contexts, agenda can also refer to someone's hidden plan or motivation. Like if someone says, I think he has his own agenda here, they mean that person might be pushing for something that benefits them personally rather than the team. It's a slightly different meaning, a little more political, but important to know. Let's keep moving. The next phrase we're going to look at is follow up. This one is everywhere in business English. Absolutely everywhere. To follow up means to do something additional after an initial action, usually to check on progress or get more information. So if you sent an email and didn't hear back, you might send a follow-up email. If you had a meeting and discussed some action items, your manager might ask you to follow up on those tasks. Listen to this short conversation. Marcus, a project coordinator, just finished a call with a potential client. He walks over to his colleague, Danielle, and says, I think the call went well, but they haven't committed to anything yet. I'll follow up with them next week to see if they've made a decision. Danielle responds, good idea. Make sure you follow up on that pricing question they had too. I think they wanted more clarity on the costs. Did you notice how follow up works both as a verb and as a noun? I'll follow up with them is the verb form. A follow-up email or a follow-up question is the noun form. In professional writing, it's often hyphenated as a noun, follow-up. This is one of those small grammar details that actually matters when you're writing emails because it shows attention to detail and makes you sound more polished. Now, I want to give you a chance to practice. Pause the video for a moment if you want and think about this scenario. Your manager asked you to contact 3 suppliers last week, but you haven't heard back from 2 of them. What would you say to your manager when they ask about it? Try to use the phrase follow up in your answer. Something like, I contacted all 3 suppliers last Monday. Supplier A has already responded, but I haven't heard from supplier B or supplier C yet. I'm planning to follow up with them this afternoon. Great. Let's keep going. The next word is deadline. Now, again, I know you've heard this one, but let me tell you something about deadlines in professional English because the way people talk about them is really interesting. A deadline is the latest time or date by which something must be completed. But in the workplace, people use a whole range of expressions around deadlines. They say things like, we need to meet the deadline, meaning we need to finish on time, or we're going to miss the deadline, meaning we won't finish in time, or can we push back the deadline, meaning can we move it to a later date, or the deadline is non-negotiable, meaning it cannot be changed under any circumstances. Here's a realistic workplace scenario. Imagine you're on a product development team. Your team lead, let's call him Raymond, calls a quick emergency meeting on a Thursday afternoon. He says, okay, everyone, I need to be straight with you. The client has moved up the launch deadline by 2 weeks. I know that's not ideal, but it's non-negotiable. We need to figure out what we can realistically deliver by the new deadline. Can everyone look at their tasks and let me know by end of day which ones you can still meet and which ones we might need to push to after launch? See how much vocabulary is packed into that little scenario? Meet the deadline, move up the deadline, non-negotiable, push to after launch. These are the kinds of expressions that will make you sound truly confident in a professional setting. And here's a little pronunciation note. The word deadline, when spoken quickly in conversation, sometimes sounds like it's one fast word. Deadline. Some people even drop the D a little, and it sounds more like deadline. Don't let this throw you off when you're listening. Let's talk about another incredibly important concept: accountability. This is a word that shows up a lot in workplace culture conversations, especially in companies that care about performance and teamwork. Accountability means being responsible for your actions and results, and being willing to explain and justify your decisions. When someone is accountable, they take ownership. They don't make excuses. They say what they're going to do, and then they do it. And if they don't, they're honest about why. In meetings, you might hear things like, "We need to create a culture of accountability on this team," which means everyone should own their tasks and their results. Or a manager might say, "Who is accountable for this project?" Meaning, who is the person responsible for making sure this gets done? Let me tell you a short story about this word in action. There's a team at a marketing agency. The team is working on a big campaign for a client. The campaign goes live and the numbers are disappointing. Nobody clicks, nobody engages, and the client is frustrated. In the team debrief, the project manager, Sophia, stands up and says, "I want to take accountability for what happened here. I approved the strategy, and I should have pushed back harder during the planning phase. Going forward, I'm going to make sure we have a stronger review process." That moment changes the entire energy in the room. Instead of everyone blaming each other, Sophia models accountability, and that actually makes the team feel safer and more connected. The word accountability is powerful, not just as a concept, but as a real tool for professional relationships. Now let's take a step forward into some vocabulary around communication at work. One word that comes up constantly is clarify. To clarify means to make something clearer or easier to understand. In business settings, people clarify things all the time because misunderstandings are expensive. They waste time, cause mistakes, and damage relationships. You might hear someone say, "I just want to clarify the timeline for this project," meaning I want to make sure we all understand when things are supposed to happen. Or, "Could you clarify what you mean by that?" is a really polite and professional way to say, "I didn't fully understand what you just said. Can you explain it more clearly? Here's a situation. Imagine you're in a video call with a new client. The client is explaining what they need from you, and partway through, they say something a bit confusing. They mention synergizing the deliverables across the verticals, and you're not quite sure what that means." A professional and confident response would be, "Thank you for that overview. Before we move forward, could I just clarify what you mean by synergizing the deliverables? I want to make sure we're completely aligned on your expectations." See what you did there? You didn't pretend to understand. You didn't stay confused and then deliver the wrong thing later. You asked for clarification in a way that sounded professional and intelligent. That is such a valuable skill. And the noun form is clarification. "Can I ask for a clarification?" Or "I'll send a clarification email after the meeting." Both perfectly natural. Now let's go somewhere a little more complex. Let's talk about stakeholders. This is a word that people who are new to corporate environments often find confusing, and it's used constantly. A stakeholder is anyone who has an interest in the outcome of a project or business decision. They might be affected by it, or they might be in a position to influence it. Stakeholders can be internal, meaning they work inside the company, like employees, managers, and department heads. Or they can be external, meaning they're outside the company, like clients, investors, government agencies, or even the public. When a company is planning a major change, like a new product launch or an office relocation, good managers think about all the different stakeholders and how the change will affect each of them. You might hear phrases like, "We need to manage stakeholder expectations," which means we need to communicate clearly and honestly with all the people who care about this project so they know what to expect. Or, let's do a stakeholder analysis, which means let's systematically think about who all the interested parties are and what they need from us. Let's hear this in a more conversational context. Imagine you're a project manager presenting to your senior leadership team. You're pitching a new internal process change. You say, "I've identified 3 main groups of stakeholders for this initiative. First, the operations team, who will be most directly affected by the day-to-day changes. Second, the IT department, who will need to implement and support the new system. And third, our clients, who will experience the downstream effects through our improved turnaround time. For each group, I've prepared a tailored communication plan to keep them informed throughout the rollout." That sounds so impressive, right? And it is, because it shows that you've thought comprehensively about who matters and how to bring them along on the journey. That's high-level professional communication. Let's take a breath and shift to some vocabulary around performance and results. One phrase that you absolutely need to know is key performance indicators, which is almost always shortened to KPIs. KPIs are the specific measurements that a company or team uses to track how well they're achieving their goals. Different departments have different KPIs. A sales team might track revenue, number of new clients, and conversion rate. A customer service team might track customer satisfaction score and response time. A marketing team might track website traffic, engagement rate, and lead generation. When someone asks, "How are we performing against our KPIs?" they're asking whether the actual results match the targets that were set. If the results are good, you might say, "We're hitting all our KPIs this quarter," meaning we're meeting or exceeding all our targets. If things aren't going well, you might say, "We're falling short on a couple of KPIs, and we need to understand why." Let me put this in a real context for you. Imagine you're working in a digital marketing agency and you have a weekly report meeting. Your boss asks everyone to give a quick update on how their campaigns are performing. You say, "So the email campaign is doing really well. Our open rate is at 28%, which is above our KPI of 22%. So that's great. However, the click-through rate is at 1.8%, and our KPI is 2.5%, so we're not hitting that target yet. I've identified the issue, and I'm planning to A/B test some new subject lines next week to see if that improves engagement." Notice how you're not just sharing numbers. You're comparing them to targets you're acknowledging a gap, and you're already proposing a solution. That's what sounds professional. That's what makes people trust you. By the way, let's pause here for a moment and check in. How are you feeling? If you're finding this a little intense, that's completely normal. Real business English has a lot of moving parts. But I want to remind you that you don't have to master all of this in one sitting. The most important thing is that you're exposing yourself to authentic language and context. And each time you do that, something sticks. So keep going. You're doing great. Now let's talk about a phrase that comes up in almost every single business meeting I've ever heard about: take the initiative. To take the initiative means to start something or do something without being told to, because you recognize it needs to be done. This is a quality that employers absolutely love. If you take the initiative, you're being proactive rather than reactive. You're not waiting to be told what to do. You're spotting a need and filling it. In a performance review, a manager might say, "One of the things I really appreciate about working with you is that you always take the initiative. You don't wait to be asked. You just see what needs to be done, and you do it." That is a golden thing to hear from a boss. And the opposite of taking initiative is being passive or waiting to be given direction, which in some workplaces gets described as being reactive. Neither reactive nor proactive is inherently good or bad, but in most professional cultures, especially in English-speaking workplaces, being proactive and taking the initiative is highly valued. Let's hear how this plays out. Imagine there's a new employee at a company, let's call her Fatima. Fatima notices that the onboarding documents for new clients are outdated and confusing. Nobody asked her to fix them. It's not technically part of her job description, but she takes the initiative to redesign them over a couple of evenings, creates a cleaner and more professional version, and brings it to her manager. Her manager is thrilled. Not only does it make the client experience better, but it also shows that Fatima is invested, observant, and action-oriented. That's the power of taking initiative. Let's keep building your vocabulary. Another important phrase in the workplace is give feedback. Now, most people know what feedback means at a basic level: praise and criticism. But in professional contexts, feedback has a whole culture around it. Good feedback is specific, constructive, and timely. It focuses on behavior and outcomes, not personal traits. And in professional settings, people often use what's called the feedback sandwich, where you start with something positive, address an area for improvement, and end with something positive again. You might hear people say things like, "Can I give you some feedback on your presentation?" which is actually a considerate way to ask before jumping into critique. Or, "I'd love to get your feedback on this report before I send it to the client," which means please read this and tell me what you think. Or, "We have a feedback culture here," meaning everyone is encouraged to share their thoughts openly and constructively. Here's a quick scenario. Your colleague, let's call him Omar, just gave his first presentation to the senior leadership team. It was his first big moment, and he was nervous. Afterwards, he asks you what you thought. You say, "Honestly, I thought you did really well for a first presentation. Your opening was strong, and you clearly knew your material. One thing I'd suggest for next time is to slow down a little, especially when you're going through the data slides." I could see some people in the room looking a bit confused, but overall, you should feel proud. You handled the Q&A really confidently, which isn't easy. That's feedback done well, specific, balanced, encouraging, and genuinely useful. Now, let's shift to a cluster of words that relate to how companies are organized and how decisions get made. One of the first things you learn in a corporate environment is the idea of hierarchy. A hierarchy is a system where people or groups are ranked according to authority or importance. In a typical company hierarchy, you might have individual contributors at the base, then team leads, then managers, then directors, then vice presidents, then the C-suite, which is the executive level, like the CEO, CFO, COO, and so on. Understanding hierarchy matters because it affects how you communicate. If you're sending an email to someone 2 levels above you, you probably want to be more formal, more concise, and more structured than if you're messaging a peer. If a decision needs to be escalated, meaning passed to a higher level of authority, you need to know who that is and what information they'll need. Escalate is actually a really useful word to know. To escalate something means to refer it to a higher level, usually because it's too complex, too risky, or too important for the current level to handle on its own. You might hear, this issue needs to be escalated to senior management. Or, when a customer complaint can't be resolved at the frontline level, it gets escalated to the customer experience team. Let me give you a scenario. Imagine you're a customer service representative. A customer calls in extremely upset because they were charged twice for the same order. You check the system, you can see the double charge, but the refund process requires approval from a financial manager. You say to the customer, I completely understand your frustration, and I sincerely apologize for this error. I'm going to escalate this to our finance team right now, and you can expect to hear back within 24 hours with confirmation of your refund. You've acknowledged the problem, you've given a clear action, and you've set expectations. That's professional service and professional language working together. All right, let's keep going because we have so much more to cover. Let's talk about the concept of a proposal. A proposal is a formal suggestion or plan that's presented for consideration. In business, proposals are everywhere. A sales team might put together a proposal for a potential client, outlining what services they'd provide and at what cost. An internal team might propose a new project to leadership and seek approval and funding. A vendor might send a proposal to a company they want to work with. Common phrases around proposals include, we submitted a proposal to the client last week, meaning we sent our formal offer, or they're reviewing our proposal and should have a decision by the end of the month, or the proposal was rejected, which is disappointing but also common, or they came back with a counterproposal, meaning they offered their own modified version of the deal. Let me tell you a little story. Elena is a sales manager at a software company. She's been working for months on landing a big contract with a retail chain. Finally, she gets the meeting she's been hoping for. She spends 2 weeks preparing a detailed proposal that covers the software solution, implementation timeline, training plan, pricing, and expected return on investment for the client. She presents it to the decision makers at the retail chain. They're impressed, but they come back with a counterproposal, asking for a lower price and a faster implementation timeline. Elena works with her team to see what's possible, makes some adjustments, and submits a revised proposal. A week later, they get the news. They won the contract. That whole process, proposal, counter-proposal, revised proposal, deal, is how a lot of business actually happens. Let's move on to some vocabulary around strategy and planning. One word you'll encounter a lot is objective. An objective is a specific goal that you're working toward. Objectives are usually more concrete and measurable than broader goals. You might hear someone say, "Our main objective for this quarter is to increase customer retention by 15%. Or, "What are the key objectives of this project?" Or in personal professional development conversations, "What are your career objectives?" Related to objective is the word milestone. A milestone is a significant point or achievement along the way to a larger goal. In a project, milestones help you track progress and celebrate small wins while staying focused on the bigger picture. We've just hit a major milestone. We've onboarded our 100th client. Or, the first milestone for this project is completing the research phase by March 15th. And then there's the concept of a roadmap. A roadmap is a strategic plan that outlines the steps needed to achieve a goal, usually over a specific time period. A product roadmap, for example, shows all the features and improvements that a tech company plans to release over the next year, laid out in a timeline. When you see a roadmap, you can understand not just what the end goal is, but also how they plan to get there, step by step. Let's hear these words together in a natural conversation. Imagine two team members, let's call them Yuki and Ben, having a casual planning conversation. Yuki says, "Okay, so what are our main objectives for the next 6 months?" Ben responds, "Our primary objective is to launch the new customer portal by Q2. Within that, we have 3 key milestones: finalizing the design by end of January, completing user testing by end of February, and then doing a soft launch to a group of existing clients before the full release." Yuki nods and says, "I'm going to put together a roadmap document so the whole team can see the big picture. It'll help with coordination." Ben says, "Perfect. Make sure you include dependencies too, so people know which tasks rely on others being finished first." See how much professional vocabulary just flowed naturally through that conversation? Objectives, milestones, roadmap, dependencies. These are words that, when you use them correctly and naturally, immediately signal to people around you that you understand the professional world. Let's talk a bit about financial vocabulary now, because even if you don't work in finance, these words come up in most business environments. The first one is budget. You probably know this one, but let's go deeper. A budget is a financial plan that estimates income and expenditure over a specific period. In business, budgets are taken very seriously. You might hear, "We're working within a tight budget," meaning we don't have a lot of money to spend, or "The project came in under budget," which is a great thing. It means you spent less than planned. Or "We've gone over budget," which is usually a problem. It means you spent more than planned. Related to budget is the word expenditure, which means the amount of money spent. And there's revenue, which is the total income that a business generates. And profit, which is what's left over after expenses are deducted from revenue. And loss, which is when expenses exceed revenue, meaning the company spent more than it earned. Here's a simple example to make this clear. Imagine a company that sells handmade candles. In 1 month, they sell enough candles to bring in $50,000 in revenue. But their expenses, including materials, packaging, shipping, salaries, and rent, total $42,000. So their profit for that month is $8,000. Now imagine the next month was slow and they only brought in $30,000 in revenue, but their expenses stayed at $42,000. That month they operated at a loss of $12,000. That's a big problem. And understanding these numbers, being able to talk about them, is essential in most business roles. Another important financial term is return on investment, which is almost always abbreviated as ROI. ROI is a measure of how much profit or benefit you received relative to the cost of an investment. If you spend $10,000 on a marketing campaign and it generates $50,000 in new sales, your ROI is very high. If you spend $10,000 and it only brings in $5,000 in new business, your ROI is negative and you've lost money. People use ROI in a broader sense too. If you spend time learning a new skill, you might talk about the ROI of the learning investment in terms of career advancement or salary growth. If a company introduces a new piece of technology to improve efficiency, they'll want to know what the ROI is. In other words, how much time or money they save versus what they spent on the technology. Now let's look at some vocabulary around teamwork and collaboration, because this is such a big part of working in English-speaking professional environments. The first phrase I want to look at is cross-functional team. A cross-functional team is a group of people from different departments or areas of expertise who come together to work on a specific project or problem. So instead of just the marketing team working on a campaign, you might have a cross-functional team that includes marketing, sales, product, legal, and customer service, each bringing their unique perspective and skills. Working cross-functionally requires strong communication skills because you're working with people who have different backgrounds, different priorities, and sometimes different vocabularies. Someone from the tech team might use very technical language that the marketing person doesn't fully understand, and vice versa. That's where your ability to communicate clearly, to ask questions, to clarify, and to bridge different ways of thinking becomes incredibly valuable. Let me give you a scenario. Imagine a company is launching a new mobile app. The project requires a cross-functional team because so many departments are involved. There's the development team writing the code, the design team creating the interface, the marketing team planning the launch campaign, the legal team reviewing the terms of service, and the customer support team preparing to handle user questions after launch. The project manager, let's call her Nadia, is responsible for coordinating all of these different groups, making sure everyone is aligned on the timeline and the objectives, and making sure that when one team finishes their piece, the handoff to the next team is smooth. She runs weekly cross-functional meetings to keep everyone on the same page and to surface any issues before they become serious problems. And that phrase, on the same page, is worth noting. To be on the same page means to have the same understanding, the same information, and the same expectations about something. It's used constantly in professional environments. Before we move forward, let's make sure we're all on the same page about the scope of this project. It's a really natural and valuable phrase. Let's look at another teamwork concept: delegate. To delegate means to give a task or responsibility to someone else, usually someone who reports to you or who has the right skills for that job. Good managers know how to delegate effectively. This doesn't mean passing off work you don't want to do. It means thoughtfully assigning tasks to the right people and trusting them to complete them. Delegation requires clarity. When you delegate a task, you need to be clear about what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, what resources the person has, and what level of decision-making authority they have. A good delegating manager might say, "I'm going to delegate the client communication piece to you. You'll be the main point of contact for the client on all updates related to design. You have authority to make decisions about design choices, but if the client asks for something that changes the scope or the budget, check with me before agreeing to anything." That's clear, specific, and empowering. The person being delegated to knows exactly what they're responsible for and what the limits of their authority are. All right, let me introduce you to another cluster of vocabulary, this time around problem solving, because challenges come up in every workplace, and how you talk about them matters. One important phrase is root cause. The root cause of a problem is the fundamental underlying reason it happened, not just the symptom. For example, if a company keeps missing deadlines, the symptom is missed deadlines. But the root cause might be that the project estimation process is flawed. So tasks always get underestimated in terms of how long they'll take. If you just address the symptom, like pushing people to work faster, you might get a short-term fix, but the problem will keep coming back. If you address the root cause, you fix the underlying issue, and the problem stops recurring. In professional settings, people often say, "We need to do a root cause analysis," which means we need to dig beneath the surface to understand what's really driving this problem. Or, "Have you identified the root cause yet?" is a question that shows you're thinking strategically about problem solving rather than just reacting. Related to this is the concept of a workaround. A workaround is a temporary solution to a problem that gets around the issue without fully resolving it. Sometimes, when something goes wrong and you need to keep moving, you implement a workaround while you look for the proper fix. For example, if a software system has a bug that prevents users from logging in correctly, a workaround might be to send users login links directly via email until the bug is fixed. It's not a perfect solution, but it keeps things running. You might hear, "We've implemented a workaround for now," which acknowledges the issue isn't fully resolved, but that you've found a way to keep operating. The key is to always follow a workaround with a real fix. Otherwise, workarounds accumulate and create more complexity and more problems over time. Let me give you a scenario where these words come together naturally. A company's order management system goes down unexpectedly. The operations team lead, let's call her Carmen, calls an emergency meeting. She says, "Okay, we have a system outage and we need to move fast. First priority, let's implement a workaround so we can keep processing orders manually while the tech team investigates. I need someone from logistics to start taking orders by phone and recording them in a spreadsheet." One team member says, "What about notifying clients who placed online orders today?" Carmen says, "Good point. Let's send them a proactive email explaining the delay and giving them an updated timeline." Now for the root cause tech team, what do we know so far? The tech lead says, "We're still investigating, but we think it's related to the server migration we did last night. We haven't confirmed the root cause yet, but we expect to have a proper fix deployed within 4 hours." Carmen responds, 4 hours. Okay, let's put that in the client communication, 4 to 6 hours to be safe. Keep me updated every 30 minutes. Did you notice all the professional vocabulary woven into that scenario? Outage, workaround, root cause, proactive communication, updated timeline. These are all the kinds of phrases that will make you sound genuinely capable and professional in an English-speaking workplace. Let's move forward and talk about some vocabulary related to communication styles and workplace relationships. One of the most important concepts you'll encounter is transparency. Transparency in the workplace means being open, honest, and clear about information, decisions, and reasoning. A transparent leader shares information with their team, explains the reasoning behind decisions, and admits mistakes openly. A transparent company communicates clearly with customers about its policies, pricing, and practices. You might hear things like, "We value transparency in this organization," or "I want to be transparent with you about the challenges we're facing," or "We have a transparent pricing model, no hidden fees, no surprises." Transparency builds trust, and trust is the foundation of good professional relationships. The opposite of transparent is opaque. Something that is opaque is hard to understand or see through. In a professional context, an opaque decision-making process is one where people outside the process can't understand how decisions are being made, which often breeds frustration and mistrust. If employees feel like decisions are being made behind closed doors, without explanation, they might say, "The management here is really opaque. We never know why things are changing." That's not a great workplace culture. Now let's look at some vocabulary around negotiation, which is a skill that comes up in many professional contexts, from salary discussions to client contracts to vendor agreements. To negotiate means to have a discussion with the goal of reaching a mutually acceptable agreement. Good negotiators are clear about what they want, but they also listen well and look for creative solutions that work for both sides. Some phrases you'll hear in negotiation contexts. We need to find a middle ground, meaning we need to find a solution that neither side gets everything they wanted, but both can accept. Let's see if we can work something out, which is a friendly way of saying, let's try to reach an agreement. This is our best offer, meaning we can't go any higher or lower than this. There's some room to negotiate on the timeline, but the price is fixed, which tells the other party exactly what is and isn't flexible. Here's a scenario. Marcus is negotiating a contract with a vendor who provides office supplies. The vendor's initial price is 20% higher than Marcus's budget allows. Marcus says, "I appreciate the proposal. We really want to work with you, and I think there's a great fit here. However, the pricing is above what we're able to commit to right now. Is there any flexibility on the cost if we agree to a 12-month contract instead of month to month?" The vendor thinks about it and comes back with a 10% discount for the annual commitment. Marcus says, "That's helpful, and we're getting closer. If we can get to 15%, I think we can move forward today." The vendor agrees to 12%. Marcus considers it and says, "I think we can make 12% work. Let's do it." That's a negotiation that ends with both sides feeling like they got something. Now, let me introduce you to some vocabulary that's really specific to the modern professional environment, especially in digital and remote work contexts. One important word is bandwidth. In technology, bandwidth refers to data transfer capacity, but in workplace conversation, bandwidth is used metaphorically to mean a person's capacity to take on more work. If someone says, "I don't have the bandwidth for that right now," they mean they're too busy or stretched too thin to add another task. "Do you have the bandwidth to take on this project?" means, are you free and able to take this on without it being a problem? This is one of those terms that came from tech and spread to general professional vocabulary. You'll hear it in almost any industry now. And it's genuinely useful because it's a polite and professional way to say, "I'm at capacity," or conversely, "Yes, I have capacity to help." Another modern workplace term is onboarding. Onboarding refers to the process of integrating a new employee or a new client into an organization. A good onboarding process ensures that new people have all the information, access, training, and support they need to be successful from day one. Poor onboarding can lead to confusion, disengagement, and high turnover. Companies that care about their people invest heavily in onboarding. They might create onboarding documents, assign an onboarding buddy, and schedule a series of onboarding meetings during the first few weeks. "How's your onboarding going?" is something colleagues often ask new team members. And from the other side, "Are you fully onboarded yet?" means, have you finished all the initial setup and training? The same word is used for client onboarding in service businesses. When a new client signs a contract, the onboarding process might involve setting up their account, collecting their information, introducing them to their account manager, and walking them through how your services work. Let's talk about one more set of vocabulary before we enter our big practice section. Let's look at some language around change and adaptability, which is huge in today's business world. The word pivot has become very common. To pivot means to make a significant change in direction, usually in response to new information, market changes, or unexpected challenges. The word became especially common in startup culture, but now it's used everywhere. We had to pivot our strategy when the market changed, or the company pivoted from B2C to B2B after realizing the consumer market was too competitive. Or at a personal level, she pivoted her career from finance to UX design. Related to pivot is the concept of agile, which in a business context means being flexible, responsive, and able to adapt quickly to change. An agile team is one that doesn't get stuck in rigid processes, but instead stays responsive to feedback and shifting priorities. We use an agile methodology for project management, which in practice often means working in short sprints, having frequent check-ins, and continuously improving based on feedback rather than spending months planning everything up front and then executing it all at once. And then there's the concept of scalability. Something is scalable if it can grow or expand without requiring a proportional increase in effort or cost. A business model is scalable if it can serve 10 times as many customers without needing 10 times as many people. Technology companies are often valued highly because their products can be scaled globally at relatively low cost per user. Is this solution scalable? is a question that gets asked a lot when evaluating new systems, processes, and business ideas. Let's hear all of this in context. Imagine a startup team is in a strategy meeting. The company started out offering personalized nutrition plans to individual consumers, a B2C model, but they're struggling to grow because customer acquisition is expensive and profit margins are thin. The CEO, let's call her Dr. Amara, says to her team, "I've been reviewing our metrics carefully, and I think we need to have an honest conversation about pivoting. Our B2C model isn't scaling the way we hoped. But we've had 3 large corporate wellness programs approach us in the last month wanting to offer our service as an employee benefit. I think there's a real B2B opportunity here that could be much more scalable. I want us to explore whether we have the bandwidth to test this model over the next quarter while keeping our existing B2C clients happy." The product lead says, "I think that's worth exploring. A corporate model would be a significant shift for our onboarding process, since we'd be dealing with hundreds of users from a single company rather than individual signups." The sales lead adds, "From my side, I think this is a great pivot. Corporate contracts are larger, more predictable, and frankly easier to close than individual subscriptions." Dr. Amara wraps up, "Let's put together a proposal for our top 3 corporate prospects and see what happens. If it works, we'll allocate more resources to scale it." That whole conversation used pivot, scale, scalable, bandwidth, onboarding, B2C, B2B, and proposal, all completely naturally. Now, I want to take a moment and do some real practice with you. We've covered a lot of vocabulary, and I want to make sure it's actually landing for you. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you a series of scenarios, and I want you to practice responding in English using the vocabulary we've learned. If you're listening to this on your own, pause after each scenario and speak out loud. Yes, out loud. Speaking out loud is one of the fastest ways to internalize vocabulary because it activates your mouth, your ears, and your brain all at once. Scenario 1. Your manager asks you how a project you're working on is going. The project is on track overall, but you're slightly behind on one milestone because a key team member was unexpectedly out sick for a week. How do you respond? Try to use vocabulary like milestone, on track, and maybe mention the root cause and a plan to get back on track. Here's one possible response, and yours doesn't have to match this exactly. Something like, "Overall, the project is on track, and we're still aiming for the original launch date. However, we did fall slightly behind on the second milestone, which was the completion of the user research phase. The root cause was that Alex was unexpectedly sick for a week, and she was the lead on that phase. We've since redistributed some of her tasks among the team, and we're planning to recover the lost time by working a bit more intensively this week. I'm confident we can still hit the final deadline." That's a strong professional response. It's honest. It explains the situation clearly. It identifies the root cause, and it shows a proactive plan. Scenario 2. You're in a meeting with a cross-functional team, and one of the other team members makes a suggestion that you're not sure you fully understand. How do you ask for clarification without sounding rude or confused? A good response might be, "That's an interesting point. I want to make sure I'm fully understanding your suggestion. Could you clarify what you mean by reallocating the resources?" Are you suggesting shifting budget, headcount, or both? I just want to make sure we're all on the same page before we decide how to move forward. See how that works? You acknowledge their contribution, you asked a specific and intelligent clarifying question, and you framed it in terms of wanting the group to be aligned. That's really professional. Scenario 3, your company is thinking about implementing a new project management software. Your team lead asks for your thoughts on whether it's a good idea. How would you respond using business vocabulary? Try something like, I think it's worth exploring. Before we commit to anything, I'd suggest we do a bit of a cost-benefit analysis and look at the ROI. We should also consider the onboarding process for the team because switching tools can be disruptive if people aren't properly trained. If the software is truly scalable and can grow with our team's needs over the next few years, then the investment is probably worth it. But if it's going to create bandwidth issues in the short term without a clear long-term payoff, we might want to wait. That response covers ROI, onboarding, scalability, bandwidth, and cost-benefit analysis. It's considered balanced and sounds genuinely thoughtful. Okay, let's keep building. I want to go into some more vocabulary that will specifically help you in written communication because emails and reports are such a big part of professional life. The first phrase is, I am writing to. This is a classic email opener. I am writing to follow up on our conversation from Tuesday. Or, I am writing to inquire about the status of my application. It's slightly formal, but still widely used and completely natural. Another useful phrase is please find attached. This is used when you're sending a document or file with your email. Please find attached the report you requested. Or, please find the revised proposal attached for your review. And then there's, I look forward to hearing from you, which is an extremely common way to close a professional email. It sets an expectation of a response and sounds polite and professional. I look forward to hearing from you at your earliest convenience. Means please reply when you can, but the phrasing is courteous and non-demanding. In more formal correspondence, you might see, as per my previous email, which means, as I mentioned in my earlier email, it's a polite but slightly firm way of pointing back to something you already communicated, often used when following up. Let's look at how an email might read using these phrases. Imagine you're following up with a potential client after sending a proposal. The email might read something like, Dear Mr. Park, I hope this email finds you well. I am writing to follow up on the proposal I sent last Thursday. Please find the updated version attached, which includes the pricing adjustments we discussed during our last call. I believe this revised proposal addresses the concerns you raised, particularly around the implementation timeline. I would love the opportunity to walk you through the changes at your convenience. I look forward to hearing from you and hope we can move forward with this exciting project. That email is clear, professional, and warm. It references the previous conversation. It delivers the update. It acknowledges the client's concerns. And it ends with an invitation to continue the conversation. Now, let me cover some expressions that you'll hear in workplace conversations that might be confusing if you haven't heard them before. The first one is touch base. To touch base means to briefly check in or make contact with someone. Let's touch base tomorrow morning to see where things stand. Or, I just wanted to touch base with you before the meeting to make sure we're aligned. It's informal, but professional and really common. Another one is circle back. This means to return to something later. Let's table that idea for now and circle back to it in our next meeting. Or, I'll circle back with you once I have more information. Then there's at the end of the day. This phrase doesn't literally mean when the workday is over. It means ultimately, or when everything is considered. At the end of the day, what matters most is that the client is happy. Or we can debate the approach all we want, but at the end of the day, we need results. And low-hanging fruit. This is a metaphor for the easiest opportunities or tasks that can deliver results with minimal effort. Before we tackle the complex stuff, let's identify the low-hanging fruit. What quick wins can we achieve this week? Low-hanging fruit is something easily achievable that still adds value. Let's put these together in a workplace conversation. Two colleagues, let's call them Hannah and James, are reviewing a sales strategy. Hannah says, "I think we're overcomplicating this. At the end of the day, our biggest opportunity right now is with our existing client base. We've been so focused on new acquisition that we haven't really explored the low-hanging fruit in our current accounts." James says, "You're right. Let me touch base with the account management team and get a sense of which existing clients have expressed interest in our premium tier but haven't upgraded yet." Hannah says, "Perfect. Circle back to me with a list by end of week, and we can put together a targeted outreach plan." That conversation sounds completely real. And once you start hearing these expressions and practicing them, they'll start to feel natural for you too. Let me bring in a few more important terms. Let's talk about deliverables. A deliverable is a specific, tangible output or result that is due by a certain date, usually agreed upon at the start of a project. In project planning, you define your deliverables early on so everyone knows what the expected outcomes are. What are the main deliverables for this project is a question that gets asked at the very beginning of most professional projects. We need to submit the deliverables by the end of the quarter. Or, the client was satisfied with all our deliverables. And closely related to deliverables is scope. Scope refers to the boundaries of a project, what is and isn't included. Getting the scope right at the beginning is critical because scope creep, which is when the project gradually grows beyond the original boundaries without a formal agreement, is one of the most common reasons projects run over budget and over time. Imagine a web design agency agrees to build a simple 5-page website for a client. The scope is clearly defined. 5 pages, specific functionality, delivered in 8 weeks. But then the client starts asking for additional features, an extra page here, a new section there, integration with their CRM system. Each individual request seems small, but together they represent significant extra work. This is scope creep. A professional response would be, "We're happy to add those features. However, they fall outside the original scope we agreed on. I'll put together a change order outlining the additional cost and timeline for those additions so we can adjust the contract accordingly." That's how you handle scope creep professionally. You don't say yes to everything and then resent the client. You acknowledge their needs and you clarify the implications for the budget and timeline. Let me introduce a few more words that come up in discussions about work culture and professional development. First, the phrase work-life balance. This refers to the degree to which someone successfully manages their professional responsibilities alongside their personal life, health, and relationships. Many companies now talk about work-life balance as a value, recognizing that overworked employees burn out and eventually leave. We really prioritize work-life balance here. A manager might say during a recruitment conversation, or someone might say, "I left my last job because the work-life balance was terrible. I was working 80-hour weeks regularly." Related to this is the concept of burnout. Burnout is a state of physical or emotional exhaustion caused by prolonged stress or overwork. It's more serious than just being tired. Burnout often involves a sense of detachment, reduced performance, and loss of motivation. In professional conversations, people are increasingly comfortable talking about burnout. I think I was heading toward burnout last year, and I had to make some changes. Or, our team has been under a lot of pressure, and I'm starting to see signs of burnout that worry me. And then there's professional development, which refers to the ongoing process of improving your skills and knowledge related to your career. Most good employers invest in professional development for their staff through training programs, workshops, conferences, online courses, or mentorship. What professional development opportunities are available here is a smart question to ask in a job interview because it shows you're thinking about growth, not just the immediate role. Let's have a short dialogue to wrap these concepts together. Imagine an annual review conversation between a manager, let's call her Layla, and her team member, Jordan. Layla says, "Jordan, I want to start by saying that your work this year has been excellent. Your deliverables are always on time and above the quality we expect. But I do want to check in with you on a personal level. How are you feeling overall? There's been a lot of pressure this year, and I want to make sure you're doing okay." Jordan pauses for a moment and then says, "Honestly, the last few months have been pretty intense. I'm fine, but I do feel like I've been running at full speed for a long time. I'm a bit worried about my work-life balance." Layla nods and says, "I really appreciate you being transparent with me about that. I don't want to lose you to burnout. Let's talk about what changes we could make to your workload. And I also want to ask, what areas of professional development are most interesting to you right now? I have some budget to allocate, and I'd love to invest in your growth." That's a warm, professional, human conversation, and it's packed with real business vocabulary used naturally. Let's continue with some vocabulary related to presentations and public speaking, which is another major arena for business English. When you give a presentation in English, you'll often use phrases to organize your talk and guide your audience. Things like, "I'd like to start by giving you an overview of what we'll cover today." That sets expectations at the beginning. Or, "Moving on to our next point," which is a transition phrase that helps your audience follow your train of thought. Or, "To summarize what we've covered so far," which signals you're about to do a brief recap before moving to the next section. And "To conclude," or "in closing," to signal you're wrapping up. There are also phrases for handling questions. "That's a great question. Let me address that." Or, "I'd like to come back to that question after the presentation if that's okay." Or, "I'm not sure I have the exact answer for that off the top of my head, but I'll follow up with you after." One thing that's really impressive in a professional presentation is the ability to manage the unexpected. If your slides don't work, or you lose your train of thought, or someone asks an unexpected question, handling it gracefully is a skill. Bear with me while we sort this out. Technically is a calm, professional response to a technical issue. That's an interesting angle I hadn't considered. Is a great response when someone challenges your perspective in a way that you find genuinely interesting. Let me give you one more full scenario. Imagine you're giving a quarterly update presentation to your department. You've prepared well, but you're a little nervous. Here's how you might open. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for making time for this update. Today, I'm going to walk you through our performance over the last 3 months, highlight the key milestones we've achieved, and share our priorities for Q3. I'll also take a few minutes at the end to address some of the challenges we've encountered and how we're planning to tackle them. Please feel free to hold your questions until the end. Though, if something is urgent or I've said something unclear, just raise your hand. That is a clean, confident, professional opening. And here's how you might handle a difficult question in the Q&A. Someone asks, "Why did we miss the customer satisfaction KPI last quarter?" You say, "That's an important question, and I want to address it honestly. We did fall short of our customer satisfaction target, and after doing a root cause analysis, we identified 2 contributing factors. First, the increase in volume after our promotional campaign created longer wait times in customer support. Second, we had some product quality issues in February that affected a small number of customers significantly. We've already taken action on both of those issues, and I'm cautiously optimistic that you'll see improvement in the Q3 numbers." That response is honest, structured, shows that you've analyzed the issue properly, and ends on a constructive note. That's exactly the kind of communication style that builds trust in a professional environment. Now let's wrap up our vocabulary journey with some expressions around decision making, because this is something that comes up constantly. To make an informed decision means to decide based on thorough knowledge and understanding of the relevant facts and options. Informed decisions are contrasted with gut feel decisions, which are based on intuition rather than data. Both have their place, but in most professional contexts, you want to be seen as someone who makes informed decisions. We need more data before we can make an informed decision on this. Or, based on the information available, my recommendation is to move forward with option B. Or, I've weighed the pros and cons, and I think the risks outweigh the potential benefits. Weighing the pros and cons is a classic phrase. Pros are the positives, the advantages of an option. Cons are the negatives, the disadvantages. When you're evaluating a decision, you list the pros and cons to get a clearer picture of which choice is best. And risk management is a huge area in business decision making. To manage risk means to identify potential problems that could occur and take steps to prevent them or reduce their impact. What's our risk management strategy for this launch? Or, we've identified the main risks and put contingency plans in place. A contingency plan is a backup plan, a plan for what you'll do if things go wrong. Let me tie everything together with one final scenario that brings together many of the vocabulary areas we've covered today. The setting is a company that makes sustainable clothing, and the leadership team is deciding whether to expand into a new international market. The CEO, Dr. Petra, opens the meeting. Thank you all for joining. Today's agenda has one main item: the decision on whether to pursue market expansion into Southeast Asia. We've done an extensive analysis over the past 2 months, and I want everyone to share their perspective before we make a final call. Let's start with market research. The market research lead, let's call him Theo, begins. From our analysis, the region represents a significant opportunity. Consumer demand for sustainable fashion is growing rapidly, particularly in Singapore, Vietnam, and Indonesia. The market is not yet saturated, so there's room for us to establish a strong position. That said, we are facing some strong local competitors who have the advantage of established supply chains. Our key differentiator would be our brand story and our commitment to transparency around sourcing. The CFO, Rosa, takes the floor next. From a financial perspective, the initial investment would be substantial. We're looking at approximately $2 million to cover market entry costs, including localization, distribution partnerships, and a targeted marketing campaign. Our ROI projections show we would break even within 18 months and start generating profit by month 24, assuming we hit our sales milestones. However, this projection carries risk. If the market responds more slowly than expected, we could face a cash flow challenge in months 10 through 16. The operations lead, Felix, then speaks. My main concern is capacity. Do we have the bandwidth, in terms of both production and team resources, to support this expansion while maintaining quality for our existing markets? I think we need to be very honest about this. If we overextend, we risk damaging the customer experience in our established markets, which would be a much more serious problem. Dr. Petra nods. That's an important point, Felix. I think the question of scalability is central here. Can we scale our operations to serve the new market without compromising our existing commitments? The team discusses this for some time, and ultimately, they decide on a phased approach. They'll begin with a soft launch in Singapore, which has the highest purchasing power in the region and the lowest logistical complexity. And they'll use the first 6 months as a learning period before deciding whether to expand to additional countries. They'll set clear KPIs for the Singapore launch, including revenue targets, customer satisfaction scores, and brand awareness metrics, and they'll review the data at the 3-month mark to make an informed decision on the next phase. Dr. Petra closes the meeting. I want to thank everyone for such a thorough discussion. This is exactly the kind of cross-functional thinking we need for a decision this important. To summarize, we're moving forward with a phased expansion into Southeast Asia, beginning with Singapore. Felix, I'm going to ask you to lead the cross-functional team on this initiative. Your first deliverable will be a detailed operational roadmap by the end of next month. I'll take accountability for communicating this decision to the board and ensuring we have the budget approved. Let's circle back in 4 weeks to review progress and make sure we're all on the same page before the launch. And with that, a complex business decision has been made and communicated with clarity, structure, and confidence. We have covered an enormous amount of ground today, and I want to take a moment to acknowledge that. You've worked hard and you've heard a lot of real, authentic business English. Let me do a quick summary of the key vocabulary we've gone through. not as a list, but as a reminder of the landscape we've covered. We talked about how meetings are organized and managed using words like agenda, milestone, and roadmap. We looked at communication vocabulary like clarify, transparent, feedback, and follow-up. We explored how organizations work with words like stakeholder, hierarchy, cross-functional team, escalate, and delegate. We went deep into performance language with KPIs, accountability, ROI, and deliverables. We covered problem-solving vocabulary like root cause, workaround, and contingency plan. We looked at financial terms including budget, revenue, profit, loss, and return on investment. We talked about workplace culture and well-being with terms like burnout, work-life balance, and professional development. We explored modern workplace vocabulary like bandwidth, onboarding, scalable, and pivot. And we practiced all of this through realistic scenarios and conversations. Now here's what I want you to do after this video. Don't just move on. Pick 5 of the words or phrases from today that you found most interesting or most relevant to your own work, and write a short paragraph using each one. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be beautiful. It just needs to be yours. Because the moment you start using language actively, writing it, speaking it, that's when it starts to become part of you. And if you're watching this on YouTube, leave me a comment below. Tell me which phrase from today's session you found most useful. I read every single comment, and I really do love hearing from you. It helps me understand what you need and what to teach next. One more thing before I let you go. I want to say something that I mean genuinely. Learning a language at B2 level and above is not easy. It requires patience, consistency, and a lot of courage. Because at B2, you're past the basics. And now every new thing you learn is more nuanced, more context dependent, more subtle. You might feel frustrated sometimes because you know that gap between where you are and where you want to be. That gap is not a sign that you're failing. That gap is exactly where learning happens. It's the space between what's comfortable and what's challenging. And every time you push into that space, you grow. So please keep going. Keep listening to real English. Keep exposing yourself to professional contexts. Watch interviews. Listen to business podcasts. Read company reports and professional articles. Every bit of exposure contributes to your progress, even when it doesn't feel like it. I'm Jessica. This is English in Advance, and I'll see you in the next episode. Take care of yourselves, keep practicing, and remember, your progress is real, even when it's slow. Talk soon. Now, before you go, I want to add something extra special for you today because you've stuck with me this far, and that tells me you are genuinely committed to your English growth. So I'm going to give you a bonus section, a deep dive into some more vocabulary areas that will truly set you apart at the B2 level and beyond. We're going to go through professional vocabulary in 3 more important categories: negotiation and persuasion language, vocabulary for difficult conversations, and then a full set of phrases for networking and building professional relationships. So take a breath, maybe grab a coffee or a tea, and let's go. Let's start with negotiation and persuasion language, because this is an area where having the right words makes a genuinely huge difference. When you're trying to influence someone's thinking or convince them to agree with you, the language you choose is just as important as the argument you're making. One of the most powerful things you can do in any negotiation or persuasion situation is acknowledge the other person's perspective first, before presenting your own. This is sometimes called mirroring or validating. When someone feels heard and understood, they're much more open to hearing a different point of view. So instead of leading with your argument, you start by showing that you've genuinely listened. For example, imagine you're trying to convince your team lead to approve a new workflow tool that you think will save everyone time. Rather than just saying, "We should get this tool, it'll be great," a more persuasive approach would be to start with empathy. You might say, "I know you've been skeptical about adding new tools because onboarding them always takes time and disrupts the team's rhythm. I completely understand that concern and I take it seriously. That's actually why I spend some time looking at this particular tool carefully." The onboarding process is much lighter than what we usually deal with, and I think within 2 weeks, it could actually reduce the amount of time our team spends on status reporting by about 30%. See the difference? You acknowledged the resistance first, showed you'd considered it, and then made your case. That's much more effective than bulldozing straight into your argument. Some really useful persuasion phrases include things like, "I think you'll find that," which is a gentle way to introduce a point you're confident about. Or, "The evidence suggests that," which appeals to logic and data. Or, "Based on what I've seen, I'd recommend," which positions your suggestion as informed and considered. Or, "One thing worth considering is," which introduces an idea without being pushy. And "What if we tried?" which frames a suggestion as an experiment rather than a commitment, making it easier for the other person to say yes. On the negotiation side, there's a phrase that's really valuable: mutual benefit. When you emphasize that an agreement will benefit both sides, not just you, people are far more willing to engage. "I think this arrangement could be genuinely beneficial for both of us," is a much more compelling opening than "This deal is good for us, and I think you should accept it." Another important concept in negotiation is BATNA, which stands for Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement. Your BATNA is what you'll do if you can't reach an agreement. It's your backup option, your walk-away position. The stronger your BATNA, the more leverage you have in a negotiation because you genuinely don't need the deal to go through. Most experienced negotiators spend time thinking about their BATNA and the other party's BATNA before any negotiation begins, because understanding both sides' alternatives helps you understand where the real flexibility is. You probably won't say the word BATNA out loud in a negotiation, but understanding the concept will change how you approach it. For example, if you're negotiating your salary at a new job and you already have another offer, your BATNA is strong, you have somewhere to go if this doesn't work out. That gives you the confidence to hold your position rather than accepting the first offer you're given. Let me give you a full negotiation scenario to practice with. Freelance translator Nina is negotiating a long-term contract with a publishing company. The company wants to pay her their standard rate, which is lower than what Nina usually charges. Here's how the conversation might go. The company representative, let's call him David, says, "We really love your work, Nina. We'd like to offer you a long-term arrangement. Our standard rate for this type of work is $0.08 per word." Nina pauses briefly and then responds. Thank you, David. I really appreciate the interest, and I've enjoyed working with your team. I want to be transparent with you. My standard rate is 0.12 per word, which reflects my specialization in literary translation and my track record with your genre. That said, I understand the value of a long-term arrangement, and I'm open to finding something that works for both of us. David says, we don't usually go above 0.09 for freelancers, even experienced ones. Nina thinks for a moment and says, I understand the budget constraints. What if we structured it this way? I'd agree to 0.10 per word for the first 6 months, and then we review based on quality and delivery. If everything has gone well, which I'm confident it will, we move to 0.12 from month 7 onward. That gives you the benefit of a lower initial rate while giving me a clear path to my standard rate. David says, that's a creative proposal. Let me take it to my manager and come back to you by Thursday. Nina says, of course. I look forward to hearing from you. That negotiation was respectful, transparent, creative, and professional. Nina didn't just accept the initial offer, but she also didn't make demands. She proposed a middle ground solution that addressed both sides' concerns. That's the art of good negotiation. Now, let's move into vocabulary for difficult conversations, which is an area that makes many people incredibly anxious, but is absolutely essential in professional life. At some point in almost every career, you will need to have a conversation that feels uncomfortable. You might need to address a performance issue with a colleague or a direct report. You might need to push back on an unreasonable request from a client. You might need to apologize for a mistake. You might need to deliver bad news. The first thing to understand about difficult conversations is that avoiding them almost always makes things worse. The longer you wait, the more tension builds, the more the issue compounds, and the more damage is done. Professional people address issues early, clearly, and constructively. Let's look at some vocabulary that helps navigate these situations. One important phrase is, I'd like to address something with you directly. This is a way of opening a difficult conversation that signals honesty and directness without being aggressive. You're not sneaking up on the person. You're being upfront that you have something serious to discuss. Can we find a few minutes to talk? There's something I'd like to address directly, is a natural and professional way to set up the conversation. Then there's the phrase, I want to give you some feedback. We talked about feedback earlier, but in a difficult context, the way you frame it matters even more. Starting with, I want to give you some feedback, rather than just launching into the problem, gives the other person a moment to mentally prepare. It also frames what you're about to say as constructive, rather than as an attack. When you're delivering the actual feedback in a difficult conversation, specificity is your best friend. Vague feedback is useless and often perceived as unfair. You've been difficult lately is vague and will likely put the other person on the defensive. But in Tuesday's meeting, you interrupted Marcus 3 times while he was presenting, and I could see it frustrated him. And the rest of the team is specific, factual, and much more productive. After sharing the specific concern, a really effective next step is to ask the other person for their perspective. I'd like to understand your perspective on this, or how do you see the situation? This does a few things. It shows that you're not just delivering a verdict, you're genuinely interested in understanding the full picture. It gives the other person a chance to share information you might not have. And it moves the conversation from accusation and defense to dialogue and problem solving. And then, after listening, you can work toward a constructive path forward. So what I'd like to see going forward is, or I think we can both agree that what would be best are ways to move from the problem to the solution. Let me walk you through a full difficult conversation scenario. Imagine a team leader, Thomas, needs to address a performance issue with a team member called Miriam. Miriam is talented, but she's been submitting work that contains errors, and it's starting to affect the team's credibility with clients. Thomas has asked Miriam to step into a private meeting room. Thomas says, "Miriam, thank you for making time. I wanted to speak with you directly about something because I think it's important, and I'd rather address it early than let it become a bigger problem." Miriam looks slightly tense, but nods. Thomas continues, "Over the past 3 weeks, I've noticed some errors in the client reports you've been submitting. Specifically, the budget figures in the March 12th report were incorrect, and there were some significant factual errors in the competitive analysis you submitted last week. The errors were caught before they went to the client, which is good, but I want to understand what's happening." Miriam takes a breath. "I appreciate you coming to me directly. I'll be honest, I've been going through a really difficult personal situation lately, and I think it's affecting my concentration. I've been trying to manage it, but I can see now that it's starting to show in my work." Thomas listens carefully and says, "I'm sorry to hear that, Miriam. I genuinely appreciate you being honest with me. I want you to know that your well-being matters to me and to this team. What I'd like to explore is what support we can offer you, and also how we can make sure the quality of your work doesn't slip further in the meantime. Would you be open to having a peer review your reports before submission for the next month or so, just as a safety net? And I'd also like to connect you with our HR team to explore what support resources are available to you." Miriam says, "Yes, both of those sound helpful. I really don't want this to continue." Thomas says, "I know you don't, and I believe you. Let's check in again in 2 weeks to see how things are going. And please don't hesitate to reach out before then if you need anything." That conversation was empathetic, specific, professional, and solution-focused. Thomas addressed the issue without being harsh. He listened without excusing the problem, and he offered support while making clear that quality needs to improve. That's how difficult conversations should go. Now let's look at our final vocabulary category for today: networking and building professional relationships. This is something that many people underestimate in their career development, especially when English is not their first language. Because networking requires not just vocabulary, but a willingness to start conversations with people you don't know, which can feel vulnerable. Let's start with how to introduce yourself professionally. A strong professional introduction is concise, clear, and memorable. It includes your name, your role, a brief description of what you do, and optionally, something that creates a connection point. "Hi, I'm Jessica. I'm a content strategist at a digital marketing firm in London. I specialize in helping B2B companies tell their story in ways that actually resonate with their audience. That's better than just, "Hi, I'm Jessica, I do marketing." The additional detail gives the other person something to respond to. At networking events, there are some phrases that help you move conversations forward naturally. What brings you to this event is a friendly and open question that works in almost any professional gathering. What kind of work do you do is broader and less leading than where do you work, because it invites the person to describe their work in their own terms. How long have you been in this industry? Is another good one that can open up an interesting conversation about the person's career journey. And when a conversation has been going well and you want to stay in touch, there are professional ways to suggest that. I'd love to continue this conversation. Would you be open to connecting on LinkedIn? Is direct and professional? Or do you have a card? Though this is becoming less common as people move more toward digital networking. Or even just, "I've really enjoyed talking with you. Would you be up for grabbing a coffee sometime?" I think there could be some interesting synergies between what you're working on and what my team is doing. After a networking event, it's good practice to follow up within 24 to 48 hours while the conversation is still fresh. A follow-up message on LinkedIn or via email might say something like, "Hi, Sarah. It was great meeting you at the Innovation Forum yesterday. I really enjoyed our conversation about sustainable supply chains. I'd love to stay in touch and perhaps continue the discussion. Looking forward to connecting." That message is warm, specific, and action-oriented. It's not generic. It references something real from your conversation, which shows you were genuinely listening. One more concept I want to share with you in this networking section is the idea of giving before you take. The most effective networkers are generous. They offer help, make introductions, share resources, and add value before they ask for anything in return. This builds goodwill and creates the kind of professional relationships that are genuinely meaningful and mutually beneficial over time. If you meet someone at a conference and they mention they're struggling with finding a good project management tool, and you happen to know a great one, you might say, "Oh, I actually faced the exact same challenge last year. Have you come across Notion? I'd be happy to share how we implemented it if that would be helpful." You're offering something without any expectation of a return. That's powerful. And sometimes the most valuable thing you can offer is a connection. That sounds like exactly the kind of challenge my friend Marcus deals with. He's a supply chain consultant, and I think you two would have a lot to talk about. Would it be okay if I introduced you? Making introductions that could genuinely benefit both people is one of the most appreciated things you can do in professional networking. All right, let's now run through a comprehensive set of useful, everyday professional phrases that you should have in your active vocabulary. These are short and punchy, but each one is genuinely valuable. Let me take you through them with real context. First, let's take this offline. This means let's continue this particular discussion outside of the current meeting, usually because it's getting too detailed or specific for the broader group. "I think we're getting into the weeds a bit here. Let's take this offline, and I'll schedule a separate call with the people directly involved." Second, to put it simply, this phrase is used when you want to summarize something complex in a clear, easy to understand way. The data is complex, but to put it simply, our customer acquisition costs have gone up while our conversion rate has gone down, and that's not a sustainable trend. Third, moving forward. This phrase signals a shift from talking about the past or current situation to discussing what will happen next. We've clearly had some challenges this quarter. Moving forward, I'd like us to focus on 3 key areas. It's also sometimes used to mean from this point on, as in moving forward, all client communications will go through me. Fourth, that being said, this phrase is used to introduce a contrast or a nuance after making a previous statement. The project has been a success overall. That being said, there are some areas where we could have done better, and I want us to learn from those. Fifth, let's table that. To table something in American English means to postpone it for later. It's worth noting that in British English, to table something means the opposite, to bring it to the table for immediate discussion. This is a good example of how English varies between countries, and knowing which version you're in matters. That's an interesting point, but it's outside our agenda for today. Let's table it and come back to it at our next meeting. Sixth, going forward, I'd recommend. This phrase sets up a recommendation clearly and professionally. Going forward, I'd recommend we implement a more structured review process so we catch these issues before they reach the client. Seventh, I'll loop you in. To loop someone in means to include them in a conversation or communication chain. I'm going to talk to legal about this. I'll loop you in once I have their feedback. Or, can you loop me in on the client emails? I want to stay informed on how the conversation is developing. Eighth, that gives me pause. This phrase means that something makes you hesitate or think more carefully before proceeding. The projected ROI is strong, but the upfront cost gives me pause. I want to make sure we have sufficient reserves before we commit. Ninth, I want to push back on that a little. This is a professional and confident way to disagree with something someone has said. It signals intellectual engagement, not conflict. I want to push back on that a little. I'm not sure the data supports that conclusion. Have we looked at the year-over-year comparison? 10th, let's get the ball rolling. This is an informal phrase that means let's start. It's often used at the beginning of a project or initiative when it's time to move from planning to action. Okay, we have alignment on the direction. Let's get the ball rolling. What are the first 3 actions we need to take? Let me now give you one final comprehensive scenario that weaves together vocabulary from everything we've covered today. I want you to really listen and notice how naturally all these words and phrases fit together when used by someone who's comfortable with them. The setting is a technology startup that's been operating for 2 years. They've achieved strong product market fit, built a loyal customer base, and are now ready to raise their first significant round of external funding. The founding team is preparing to pitch to investors. We're going to listen in on a preparation meeting between the 3 co-founders, Dr. Leo Chen, who is the CEO, Amara Osei, the COO, and Priya Nair, the CTO. Dr. Leo opens the meeting. All right, team. Our pitch meeting with the investment firm is in 2 weeks. We've come a long way together, and I genuinely believe we're ready for this. But I want us to be absolutely sharp going into that room. So today, let's focus on making sure our narrative is airtight, our KPIs are clearly articulated, and our responses to tough questions are confident and data-driven. Amara, can you start by walking us through where we stand on the key metrics? Amara pulls up her presentation. Absolutely. So at a high level, we're in a strong position. Monthly recurring revenue has grown 23% quarter over quarter, which puts us ahead of the milestone we set at the beginning of the year. Our customer retention rate is 94%, which is exceptional for our sector, and our Net Promoter Score, which measures how likely customers are to recommend us, has consistently been above 60, which is considered excellent. Dr. Leo nods. Good. Now the investors are also going to want to understand our burn rate and our runway. Amara, can you walk through the financial picture? Amara continues. Our current monthly burn rate is $180,000. With our existing reserves, we have approximately 14 months of runway, meaning 14 months before we'd need either additional funding or to reach profitability. The purpose of this funding round is to extend our runway to 30 months and to use the capital to accelerate growth, specifically in sales and marketing, and in expanding our engineering team, so Priya's team can move faster on the product roadmap. Dr. Leo says, good. Now let's talk about the tough questions, because investors are going to push us on our competitive landscape and our defensibility. Priya, can you speak to our technical differentiation? Priya says, sure. Our core differentiator is our proprietary algorithm, which we've been developing and refining for 2 years now. No competitor currently offers anything comparable in terms of accuracy at scale. We also have 18 pending patents, which provides a meaningful barrier to entry. That being said, I want to push back on the narrative that we're safe simply because of our technology. Our real moat is our data. Every customer interaction makes our algorithm smarter, and as our customer base grows, the performance gap between us and any potential competitor widens. That's a compounding advantage. Dr. Leo smiles. That's a great way to frame it. Let's make sure that point lands clearly in the pitch. He turns to Amara. What about the question of team? Investors always ask about whether the founding team has what it takes to scale the company. Amara responds, I think we're actually in a strong position here. Between the three of us, we have deep domain expertise, a track record of shipping product, and complementary skills. What I want to make sure we communicate is our culture of accountability, our agile approach to product development, and the strength of the team we've already built around us. We have 22 people now, and every single one of them was hired with extreme care. Dr. Leo nods. Good. And then there's the go-to-market question. Moving forward, I think we need to be really crisp about our expansion strategy. Investors will want to see that we have a scalable go-to-market motion, not just a handful of enterprise clients we landed through personal connections. Priya says, agreed. And that ties into the scalability question. Our product is inherently scalable. We can serve 10 times our current customer volume without a significant increase in infrastructure costs. The bottleneck is always sales and customer success, which is exactly what we'd use the funding to address. Dr. Leo wraps up the preparation session. Okay, I think we're in good shape. Here's what I want us to do between now and the pitch. Amara, please finalize the financial model and make sure all our numbers are bulletproof. Priya, I'd love for you to put together a one-pager on our technical differentiation that we can leave behind with the investors. and I'll work on the overall narrative and the storytelling arc of the pitch. Let's reconvene in a week to run a full rehearsal and stress test the Q&A. Any questions? Amara says, just one. What's our ask? Are we being transparent with the investors about the specific amount we're seeking and how we plan to deploy it? Dr. Leo says, absolutely, full transparency. We're seeking $5 million at a $25 million pre-money valuation. We'll break down the allocation clearly. 60% to sales and marketing, 30% to engineering, and 10% to operational infrastructure. Investors respect clarity and specificity. Let's give them that. And that, right there, is what B2 Business English looks and sounds like in one of its most high-stakes forms. Every word chosen with intention. Every sentence structured for clarity and impact. Every response to a question honest, specific, and confident. Now let's do one final practice exercise before we truly wrap up. I'm going to give you 5 sentences using some of the vocabulary we covered today, but with gaps. Listen carefully and try to fill in each gap with the correct word or phrase. You can pause the recording after each sentence and say your answer out loud. The team managed to complete the project ahead of schedule and well under the agreed upon blank, which impressed the client and led to a follow-up contract. The word you're looking for is budget. The team came in under budget. Before making a final decision, the leadership team conducted a thorough analysis of all relevant blank, including the board of directors, key investors, and their top-tier clients. The word you're looking for is stakeholders. They analyzed the needs and expectations of all their stakeholders. The new campaign didn't perform as expected, and the marketing director asked the team to do a blank analysis to understand what went wrong at a fundamental level. The phrase you're looking for is root cause. A root cause analysis helps you go beyond the surface symptoms to understand the real underlying problem. The director announced a significant blank in company strategy, explaining that rather than continuing to target individual consumers, the company would shift its focus entirely to the business-to-business market. The word is pivot. The company pivoted its strategy. When the junior designer submitted her first major project entirely without being asked to, her manager praised her for taking the blank, saying it was exactly the kind of behavior that would lead to rapid advancement in the company. The phrase is initiative. She took the initiative. How did you do? If you got them all, that's fantastic. If you got some wrong, that's also fantastic, because you now know which concepts need a little more attention and practice. That's valuable information. As we genuinely close out today's session, I want to leave you with something that I think is really important to hold on to as you continue your English learning journey. Language is not just about words. It's about confidence. And confidence comes from repetition, from exposure, from making mistakes and continuing anyway, and from gradually building a deep familiarity with how the language actually works in real situations. The vocabulary we've covered today is powerful, but it's only powerful if you use it. So I want to challenge you to pick at least 3 words or phrases from everything we've covered and consciously try to use them in a real context in the next 24 hours. In an email, in a conversation, in a message to a colleague, anywhere. The more you use new language in real contexts, the faster it becomes part of how you naturally think and communicate. And if you want to keep practicing at this level, this channel is for you. We do B2 and C1 level sessions regularly, covering everything from business English to academic writing to IELTS and TOEFL preparation to everyday conversational fluency. So if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It means a lot to this channel, and it makes sure you never miss a session. Also, if you have a topic you'd like us to cover, a specific situation you want to practice for, or a type of vocabulary that's giving you trouble, leave it in the comments below or send us a message. I take your suggestions seriously, and I genuinely shape future episodes around what you tell me you need. You've been amazing today. Staying through a session this long takes real dedication. And dedication is exactly what separates people who improve from people who stay stuck. You are clearly in the first group. I'm Jessica, and this has been English in Advance. Thank you for being here. I'll see you next time.